James Talberg, and I'm here today with Ruslan Bortnik, going to discuss the latest about Ukraine. Ruslan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, James. It's a pleasure for me.
It's been a while since we discussed the situation in the front line. I think it makes sense to break it down monthly now. What has happened in the past month on the front line with visualizations, what challenges the Ukrainian forces are facing, and what has happened. We have two main strategic points. I think it's the North Kursk region in Russian territory, and on the eastern part of Ukraine in Donbass. Whichever you want to start with, let's go from there, and then we'll kind of like snowball it.
Do you see the map of the conflict?
We can see the map, yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's entire territory of Ukraine. You need like a star on the general map with 5 angles. And the red part is occupied by Russia, part of Ukrainian lands, near 112,000 square kilometers in general, and it's almost 18.5% of entire Ukrainian territory. And let's see the situation from the beginning of this year, from the last months, because it's very visible what is going on, what the strategies and what the movements we have on the battlefield. In the January 1st of 2025, we had that situation when Russia was controlling 111, almost 12,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territories, and you can see that to the end of this period, Russia achieved more than 300 square kilometers additional.
Which part they had the biggest advance?
If you are talking about the biggest advance, of course, Russia was very successful in the region of Pokrovsk. This is Pokrovsk, Mirnograd region. And due the last months, Russia captured the middle city, even big city in Donbass, Kurahovo, with very important energy power plant. And also Russia captured the middle-sized city, it's Velikaya Novoselka. It's also a very important city because it was the biggest city of the southern part of Donetsk Oblast of Ukraine, and there was built a very good defensive equipment, buildings and so on, and Russia broke this line. And the fall of Velikaya Novoselka and Kurahovo opens the road for Russian forces to Zaporizhya and even Dnipro, the very big cities of Ukraine.
Ruslan, would you be able to zoom in on that map? And I just want to bring up from the last conversation that we talked, you've mentioned that there is a couple of middle-sized cities that can be used as a defense line for the Ukrainian forces, that if they will fall, there's going to be a chunk of empty land that will be easy to kind of like just move for the Russian forces if they'll start moving. Can we zoom in on that part and see if those lines are still there? Or this is what you've mentioned last time, that if they'll break those 2-3 middle-sized cities, they'll be able to move faster.
That is the problem which I'm talking about. That Russia broke the main defense line of Ukrainian forces in Donbass. After the capturing Kurahovo areas and after the capturing Velikaya Novoselka, there is no one, even middle-sized city, till Zaporizhya and Dnipro.
It's an empty land now.
It's not empty land. It's a land with small villages, small settlements, and moreover, it's a very flat surface, very flat land with absence of any significant.
So it's fairly easy to move machinery, heavy machinery.
Yeah, with any serious natural barriers and so on. Even we see these small towns here. It's big villages, Pokrovsk, Prasina, and so on. It's only big villages or very small towns. It's not an urban area or it's not a urban agglomeration.
Yeah, so just
at
to
all.
explain the logic for people who are watching us, if you have a middle-sized cities and you have those 9 and 12 floor buildings, they can be used as a defense line because it's easier to hide there and it's hard to like kind of like move along them.
It's a hard truth of this war. Every city in this war became a castle and for defending lines, and every side is destroying these cities. Very, very, very huge, very huge. So
and now we just don't have those cities. It's just small villages that it's easier to move.
So we have this empty space till Zaporizhya and Dnipro. And of course, you can say me, Ruslan, what we were talking about? Here is, for example, from battlefield, battle line, front line to Zaporizhya only 30 kilometers. Why you are talking about that distance from 100 kilometers? 115 kilometers. Why you are talking about why Russian forces is not going to offense to the shortest directions? But the problem is that this line, this battle line, is very good defended. A lot of building made it during the war because this battle line was made in 2022. And for the last 2 years, both sides created a lot of equipment, defense lines, and so on this line. So it's very hard to go through this defense line. But in this direction, when you're talking about the east, this defense line is broken now, and there is no, if you are talking about the movement from the east, and there is no a significant, strong defense line in this direction. And the fields is very suitable for the motorization, defense, and so
for the movement, yeah.
Yeah, so this...
Ruslan, can I ask you, before we move forward, would you be able to draw a line where is Donetsk region, the oblast, and like what are the borders, so we can see how much there is left from Donetsk, and where do they get into Dnipro region and so on? Like what is left?
I'm drawing this line. So
I'm curious because Putin have mentioned a million times that his strategic goal is to take over Donetsk and Luhansk. Luhansk is a little bit bigger, but with Donetsk, it seems like they're getting pretty close to achieving their set goals before the war.
I'm drawing the line. This is the number one. It's a Donetsk Oblast, and to the borders of Donetsk Oblast, in the shortest directions, now we have 4 kilometers, only 4. And I think it will be one more a political risk for Ukraine for these years, because Russian troops will intervene Dnipropetrovsk.
We'll get into Dnipro.
Yeah. But in general, Ukraine still is controlling a very huge part of Donetsk Oblast, not less than 1/3, 30% of this oblast. We are talking about Pokrovsk agglomeration, and we are talking about Slovyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. If we are talking about the Lugansk Oblast, here is Zaporizhya Oblast, the second, and here is...
Ruslan, before we move forward, just a simple question. There is still a big piece like northeast on the map, like that big circle that you just draw. It's still Donetsk. Why would they move to Dnipro? Why would they move to Zaporizhya if they can just keep focusing on Donetsk, because they've mentioned how important taking over Donetsk for them?
It's a very important question, a very, very right question, because the Zaporizhya Oblast is also a part of Russian constitution. I want to remind you, and because this a very urban agglomeration is very good prepared for the defense. It will be very hard for Russia to capture just in the face this region. So they can try to a surrounding movement. They can try use Dnipropetrovsk Oblast only for surrounding Ukrainian troops in Donetsk Oblast, or they could try to movement to Dnipropetrovsk Oblast like a trade point for the future negotiation with the United States and with Ukraine. it's much easier to Russia can spend a lot of time with fighting for this last part of Donetsk Oblast. Is more convenient, more clever to go to the flat lands till the Zaporizhya and Dnipro, and to make a military and political crisis at the same moment for Ukraine. If we're talking about the Lugansk Oblast, I want to say that Russia is controlling it for 99%. Also, Russia is controlling near 13% of Kharkivska Oblast in the region of Kupiansk and Volchansk also. And also during this month, in the beginning of the year, Ukraine lost a lot of position in very important city of Toretsk. It's near Gorlovka, Toretsk here, and it looks like Ukraine is losing Toretsk, and it's a question of the future, few days, few weeks, not less. And Ukraine lost a lot of very significant points in Chasov Yar. It's a city near the Bakhmut, and it looks like Ukraine could also lose the city for the next weeks or months. And if Russia will break these defense lines in Toretsk and Chasov Yar, Russia will continue a more easier offensive operation to Konstantinovka, Druzhkovka, Kramatorsk, and Slovensk. So the general situation for Ukrainian battlefield is very hard, extremely hard, because even if we are taking into account only the Pokrovsk direction, just count the arrows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, more than 20 directions of local Russian offensive operation. And of course, Ukrainian forces, which are suffering of hard losses, which are suffering of deserters, which are suffering from the a small amount of weapons and so on. Ukrainian forces are not able to defend all these directions, and every day Russia is capturing new cities, new villages, and new areas of Ukrainian lands. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky even sent one of the best Ukrainian general, Drapati, to manage this direction, but I think he will not be successful in this direction also. Now, Ukrainian government in sitting in front of very hard decision. Withdraw from Kursk region, because in Kursk region we still have a very good forces, and to use them to stop Russian offensive operation in Donbass, or continue keep fighting in Kursk Oblast and keep losing the territories of Donbass.
So I understand all the perspectives why it's challenging for Ukraine to balance Russian counteroffensive. But I have a different question. For how long do you think Russia can keep moving in that pace, considering their financial situation, consider their political situation, how many more people they can keep mobilizing, like how endless, or maybe not endless, their resources are to continue that slow offensive operation on the eastern part of Ukraine?
It's a question for 100%, for military headquarters and so on. But it looks like Russia will be able to continue its offensive operation during 2025. We don't know what will be in the deep future in 2026 and then, but now it looks like Russia is able to continue. Russia has a significant financial storage and ability to continue for continuation of this war. Russia made only one wave of mobilization, and it was made in 2022. And for the last 2 years, Russia has not made any mobilization. So Russia still has a huge military demographical resources. Ukraine made, for comparing, Ukraine made 14 waves of mobilization in Ukraine, and our people's resources are almost exhausted at all. And Russia still has a very strong military industrial complex, which is producing a lot. And moreover, Russian allies, North Korea, Iran, and others, Belarus, also are selling to Russia a lot of equipment. So it looks for me that this resourcial disadvantage is deepening if we are talking about Ukrainian side and Ukrainian-Russian comparison of abilities. Without, as you know, our United States advisors and experts are saying that Ukraine will be able to continue this fight for the next 6-9 months, then it could be some kind of tactical collapses in Ukrainian fronts when Ukraine can lose a significant areas of territories. It doesn't mean that Ukraine will capitulate, but it means that Russia will achieve the situation that Russia had in the beginning of the war, when deep Russian strikes were be able, and deep Russian movements were be able. But everything is dependent, of course, if you're talking about Ukraine, everything is dependent on the level of Western support. Without Western support, without systematic support, Ukraine will not be able to fight for a long time.
And now if we may move to the Kursk region, what is the situation there? And I like that you've mentioned before that Ukraine is potentially considering or should considering taking its elite forces out of the Kursk region to potentially stabilize the situation in Donbas region.
Kursk region it's a place of very hard fights, extremely hard fights. Moreover, you know, the North Korean troops are also taking part in these fights. And during this month, Ukraine lost additionally near 60 square kilometers of this territory. It's 15% of these territories in generally, but Ukraine still is able to keep these territories, and still Ukraine is still controlling more than 400 square kilometers with these territories. And this is a very big political problem for Russia. And if we are talking about the negotiation, of course, but if we are talking about the internal political situation and evaluation, the situation from Russian society, it's also a big problem. Russia makes almost all which she can to trying to kick off Ukrainian forces from these lands. Ukraine is waiting for the starting negotiation with the Trump administration and is waiting to ability to use this Kursk region to use this platform like a playing card in negotiation.
If Russians are slowly squeezing the Ukrainians out of the Kursk region, you've mentioned that they have lost, was that 15%?
50% for the month, near 60.
In a month.
In a month.
And we also have the situation where you said that Russians potentially are capable to continue the war for the next year, for the entire 2025. Wouldn't that make more sense for Russians to squeeze the Ukrainian forces first out of the Kursk region and then start negotiations? Because that's a political disadvantage in negotiations.
Yeah, maybe this is the question why this political negotiation hasn't started yet. Maybe this is the reason.
I'm not an expert, but you know, I would just think rationally. If Ukrainian forces will be at the end squeezed out of that territory, and if every month it will move 10-15% losses for the Ukrainians, doesn't that make more sense to move them out right now and shift them to the Donbas region to stabilize the situation? Because if the negotiations are not starting, and this is what's blocking negotiations, then clearly the aspect of having that as an advantage in negotiations against Russians are not working, because Russians just will just wait. They'll be like, we'll just wait.
From military side, there is no reason to keep these territories because it's very hard to keep them. It's this this figure, which is 17 kilometers from one side to another side, and it's near 25 kilometers of length. It's these lands are shelling through all Russian artillery. There is no safe place in this lands, no safe place at all. So from military side, there is no reason to keep these territories, and Ukrainian losses in this battlefield in this Kursk region are extremely heavy. I think they are comparable. These losses are comparable with the Russian losses in this region, because Russia is able to make any maneuver. Russia is able to cut in every main and every place and attack in every place when they want. But Ukrainians are just locked on that very small,
limited,
very small, very limited territory.
They're surrounded on the map.
But yes, but if we're talking about political goals, Ukrainian government is willing to change, to trade these territories to another Ukrainian lands. There is such a wishful thinking to change the Kursk region for the entire occupied lands. I think it's impossible because we are talking about quite different, extremely different sides of captured lands.
Of course,
for 400 kilometers and 112,000 square kilometers. It's quite different, different sites. But if we're talking about possible changing of Kursk region for
it's between Kursk and
Kharkiv region, it's quite possible.
What is the situation around Ukraine striking deeper into Russia, trying to get the oil tanks, other resources that are being transported from Russia to its export outside of the country? How useful, how effective they are, and what's the goal behind it?
Ukraine is trying to raise the stakes before negotiation and make as much as it possible damage for a Russian economical system and for Russian, of course, for Russian energy export. And Ukraine last month, Ukraine was actively attacking the Russian transit pipelines. We are talking about
the pipelines and refineries.
We are talking about the Druzhba pipeline, which are exporting oil to Europe, Kazakh oil now. It works now. We are talking about that Ukraine cut the Russian transit of Russian gas through Ukrainian lands, and Ukraine was attacking the refineries and the pipelines of Southern Stream. It's a pipeline which are going from the Russian lands to Turkey and then to Europe again. And it makes a huge economical losses for Russia. We are talking about the billions of United States dollars. And it's one of the goals for Ukrainian side to create a new playing card. If you are not accepting our demands, we will continue our strikes to your energy infrastructure, and then we are continue to cut your money. It's one of Ukrainian strategy. Of course, Russia is answering for this strategy by the strikes of Ukrainian infrastructure, by strikes on Ukrainian gas infrastructure, and there is some risk for Ukraine that Ukraine could feel a very deep shortage of gas and electricity in the next month, because we have gas in our storages, but the infrastructure of these storages, outside surface infrastructure of these storages is damaged a lot, and there is also such a significant risk. So this war also has a very strong economical and money ties and very strong energy ties.
Ruslan, I also want to talk to you about the negotiations. What stage we're currently at in terms of the negotiations between Trump administration and Russia, and what role Ukraine is playing at the moment. I've seen Trump making a couple of announcements, to me, it looks like he's trying to reduce the demonization levels that Russians have gained since the beginning of the war. He's mentioning that Russians used to be our friends. They have helped us to win the Second World War with huge losses. Like, he's trying to humanize them a little bit to potentially start negotiations.
Not only Trump, but also Tucker Carlson. You know what he said last hours, that he said that Putin is not enemy for me. He hasn't made something bad for me.
I haven't watched the last interview, but yeah, it seems like they're trying to justify.
It's just a technology, but in general, it looks like now sides are in a preparation stage for this negotiation, and new American administration is trying to clear the field from the obstacles and barriers for this negotiation. New American administration is preparing public opinion in United States to accept and even to support this negotiation with Russia. And very sorry for Ukrainian side, new American administration is trying to withdraw, to kick off Ukraine from the first stage of this negotiation. Trump said, for example, that Zelensky is ready to accept the peace, to support the peace. It means, in other words, it means that we don't need Ukraine now in negotiation because Ukraine is ready to accept.
Because they're ready.
And Trump also said last week that Zelensky couldn't let this war start and go. It's also, there is some kind of guilty and responsibility from Zelensky side from this war. And at the same time, we have a de-demonization of Russia, you are right, and an attempts to postpone Ukrainian participation from this negotiation process.
What does that mean in practical perspective? Where do they stand right now in terms of negotiations? What are they negotiating? Can we expect to have a phone call soon between Trump and Putin? And how it's going to play out? Like, they'll have a phone conversation, and then what? Like, what can be a potential agreement, and for how long they can postpone Ukraine's participation?
As I know, Lex Friedman is going to take the new interview from Putin's side, and but I'm waiting for the call between Trump and Putin in the nearest days or weeks. Everything almost is ready for it. Moreover, if you noticed the statements of Zelensky and Putin, it looks like they are also preparing for the negotiation with each other. Putin said that we can speak with Zelensky.
He said that he can speak, but he said that Zelensky can't sign anything because he's not legitimized from.
But he can part, and we are talking about that the country which has had a negotiation with Taliban or with a new regime in Syria and so on, with people who were not elected at all. Never.
Yeah, that's very interesting perspective. You can negotiate things with people that weren't elected, but you don't want to be in negotiation with somebody who was elected. And technically, I'm not quite familiar with the Ukrainian law, but I think because there is a martial law in Ukraine, Zelensky is legitimized to stay in power and sign potential treaties and participate in negotiations.
For Ukrainian law, there is no any question about the legitimacy of Zelensky in the parliament of Ukraine also, because due to the martial law, the responsibility of any government body is continuing, extended till the end of the martial law. Doing so, there is two marks of legitimacy. The first, internal law, and we have a constitutional court and very responsible bodies who can make such a decision, and the international recognition. If you are talking about the international recognition, of course, Zelensky is fully recognized.
He's recognized,
Ukrainian president. So I think it's a part of Russian game for decreasing Ukrainian negotiation positions. It's from Ukrainian side, the Ukrainian president said that it means these claims of Putin means that Putin is afraid of Zelensky. It's also part of game. It's an attempt to provoke Putin to some kind of behaving, to losing the face, to losing the its position in the eyes of the international leaders and so on. We have preparations stage, and I hope, I suppose to see the call between the Putin and Trump during next days or weeks, and I'm sure that Trump will try to sit Zelensky and Putin around one table till the end of his 100 days term, till the beginning of the May of this year.
As much as I know, before the leaders of the countries are meeting and signing anything, there's a lot of preparation work. So when they come in, things have to be kind of like finalized 90 or 95% before, because if they just meet and nothing is finalized, it's just going to be a bunch of arguments that will lead to nothing. That means in the next 100 days, or a little bit less than 100 days, there is a massive preparation to those negotiations. So there is potentially already a formula what they're going to sign and how that peace agreement or ceasefire agreement could look like.
I think the ceasefire agreement is much more possible scenario than the full peaceful agreement. It's very hard to achieve full peaceful agreement because we need to find a solution for the a lot of questions on economic, on property, on political
territorial
balances. Territorial, it's almost impossible, unfortunately, for nowadays. And my square in this situation, and I'm very worried about that if the Bloomberg's authors are right, and we are entering the era of new empires, also, which I was talking a lot before, and it looks like Bloomberg.
We've mentioned that on the last video.
Yeah. And we were talking about the imperial president and so on. But Bloomberg, yesterday, Bloomberg made an article that Putin, Xi Jinping, and Trump just will divide the world. And if they are true, if they are right in this situation, it means that the worst scenario for Ukraine could happen. It means that the peaceful plan of ending war model could be sent to Kiev without previous discussion with Kiev. It's the worst situation which could happen, and of course there are significant risks for it. Unfortunately, but I hope that in the beginning we will see the negotiation between Trump and Putin. Then Ukraine and Europe will be invited to this negotiation table also, and all together they will find the solution for this crisis. Because it's very easy to find the solution for Russian-Ukrainian war without Ukraine, but it's extremely hard to fulfill any agreement without Ukraine.
Why is it easy without Ukraine, and why is it hard with Ukraine?
Because Ukraine has its own amendments and claims for this situation, and the question of losing face for Zelensky will be also very sharp in this situation. So it's much easier to find the agreement without Ukraine, but it's almost impossible to fulfill this agreement without Ukraine. Because the Ukrainian government, if they will just receive the letter from Washington and Moscow, they will say, we are not going to fulfill this agreement because we have another allies, France or Great Britain, and we are not going to accept your agreement. You can do everything with us, but we will not do it. And it means the chaos, it means the escalation of the conflict and so on. Of course, it doesn't mean that Moscow and Washington will not go to this path, but this path will be also very hard for them.
Ruslan, you've mentioned before the Bloomberg's article that we potentially get into the phase of new empires, and that Trump, Xi Jinping, and Putin can meet to divide the world into zones of influence, create so-called borders of influence, and then obviously the day after, I think there will be a lot of conflicts in between those borders. That being said,
we were discussing it. It's very clear with a lot of arguments last time in our channel. Yeah.
So I'm just curious. That being said, where would that line will lay in terms of Ukraine? I'm asking. So I'll just.
Moreover, my answer for your question could lead me to the responsibility in the face of law enforcement agencies.
No, just I'll twist it a little bit into a different direction, because I'm asking because the European Union, Europe, Western world, they don't seem to be ready to accept Ukraine into their Western family. And Russians are obviously have a different agenda for Ukraine. So from that perspective, I'm just curious, will Ukraine just get stuck in between the borders?
It looks like that Ukraine, some more historical time, will be a buffer zone between East and West. Bigger or smaller, but buffer zone. Of course, the United States is willing to save Ukraine in their but unofficial zone of influence. But it means that Ukraine will not, it looks like for now, Ukraine will not be a part of Western world for the nearest future. Maybe Ukraine has a chance to become a member of European Union. But European Union is very divided on Ukrainian question. And moreover, European Union is also changing, very dramatically changing in the eyes of its own citizens.
Ruslan, thank you so much for all your comments today, and we'll be back with more updates next week.
Thank you very much, James, too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.